Welcome back to Wake Up America. I'm Rachel Roller. The most disruptive cyber attack on record, leading to the closure of the Colonial Pipeline, nearly took the U.S. to the brink of a major national energy crisis, and the U.S. is paying for it. So joining us now to discuss, business and market analyst Seth Denson, also former Keystone Pipeline worker Neil Crabtree. Welcome back to Wake Up America to both of you.
Thank you. Good to be here, Rachel.
Now, Seth, let me ask you first. The Colonial Pipeline confirms it paid almost $4.5 million to the hackers of the Colonial Pipeline. The CEO, Joseph Blunt, says that paying ransom was the right thing to do for the country. This clearly a very controversial decision. What do you think? Do you think it was the right thing to do?
Well, yeah, that's a mixed question. I'm glad I wasn't the one having to make it. And I say that in large part because there's almost always long-term consequences or possible consequences to short-term decisions, right? On the surface, you have really an economy that was crippled because there wasn't fuel getting to where it needed to go. And really, less than $5 million is not that much compared to the economic impact that this was going to have. That being said, and also recognizing that this was a private industry doing this, if you give a mouse a cookie, it's going to want some milk. And what we just told bad actors across the globe was American companies are willing to pay if you try to cripple them through cyber attacks.
One of my favorite books, actually, Seth, that I just bought for my soon-to-be daughter. And that's what a lot of people are pointing out. If we're going to pay the ransom, how is this not going to happen again? Neil, you have a very interesting perspective here. You lost your job after President Biden closed the Keystone Pipeline. In one of his first moves as president, do you think there's now a rising threat to our energy system as a result?
Well, I knew there has been all along, and it's to me, it's not just from the cyber attacks, but it's more of a self-inflicted threat we're facing by not upgrading these systems and doing the maintenance on them that we need and, adding more to our energy infrastructure. We shouldn't be relying on just one pipeline to service, a heavy populated area of the country like this.
Let's talk about clean energy for a minute. Seth, the Biden administration revoking the Keystone Pipeline to focus on developing a clean energy economy. But then the administration also allowed tankers to transport overweight loads of gas and waived environmental regulations that were preventing gas to be taken to certain areas. So how exactly does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. It certainly seems, I don't know if it's hypocritical or just ignorant. Because if you've got a climate issue on one side, yet we're utilizing what they say science says is a climate killer on the other side to solve for this. It seems like a huge problem. Listen, I don't know if this is just virtue signaling, but what's happening is by what they're doing on the Keystone Pipeline and some other things, it's propping up our global competitors is what it's doing. It's allowing them the ability to do what they need to do. And my understanding of specifically climate change is that that's a global problem. And if we don't solve it globally, we're not getting anywhere with it. And what we're doing on the back end is we're hurting our economic output capabilities and our workers like Neil who need jobs and are doing good work. And by the way, the Biden administration specifically has said, they've all actually come out and said, pipelines are the best way to transport fuel and gas. So I'm wondering what the thought process is.
A lot of eyebrows raised when that comment was made as, wait a minute, so pipelines are in fact the best way. Neil, let me ask you, kind of aside from all these questions, how are you doing since you lost your job? What are you doing now?
Well, we've been able to find some smaller projects, but they're the kind of projects that maybe only employ 2 or 3 welders versus the Keystone Pipeline, which would have employed, thousands of welders. There's just simply not enough man hours out there right now to support the members of my local. I'm lucky enough that I have found a small job, but there's plenty of people out there that are not as lucky as I am right now.
No, of course, and I am happy to hear that you were able to find work, but as you point out, many people not. Now, we know some states are urging President Biden to reinstate the Keystone Pipeline and reverse those energy policies because of what's been happening lately. Also, the gas shortages we're seeing, major gas shortages along the East Coast. Some saying we need safe and clean energy sources. Neil, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think canceling that Keystone Pipeline, it was a huge mistake because it was a source of oil from an ally of ours. You look at what Germany's going through right now. They've been considered one of the most green developed countries in Europe, but they're in a situation where they're having to buy gas from one of our enemies right now, Russia. That's what happens when you come energy independent or dependent on another foreign nation. We don't need to be in that cell.
Right. Speaking of Russia, the Biden administration is going to waive sanctions for the construction of Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline. House Republican Whip Steve Scalise took to Twitter saying, in part here you can see, let me get this straight, Joe Biden canceled a pipeline that would have benefited American workers and families, but now is going to waive sanctions for Putin building a Russian pipeline. Where's the media outrage? Seth, your take.
Well, listen, it goes back to something I said a moment ago, Rachel. Again, good enough for thee, not for me. I don't understand this. Again, if we are focusing on science, and that's what we want to kind of constantly throw out there, we have to do this globally if there is a climate crisis. And allowing Russia to move forward, as Neil just mentioned, props them up. It gives them the ability to go to the market, and it hinders us. And it makes no economic sense. And going back to that, and I'm all for protecting our climate and making sure we have alternative sources when they're available, but you don't do it on the backs of shutting down our current sources. That just doesn't make any economic or even long-term good American sense for our progress and growth.
And Neil, we have just a few seconds left. I want to give you the last thought here. As someone who has a very different perspective, as I pointed out, but also personally impacted by this, when this decision was made about the Keystone Pipeline, a lot of people said, oh, thousands of jobs, but they'll do something else. You have been personally impacted and you know very well the inner workings of this. What would you like to see done?
Just common sense. We can't flip a switch and go to green energy overnight and just neglect what has built this country and that we still rely on. It's going to get us in some serious trouble if we keep, canceling all these pipelines and neglecting them.
All right, Seth Denson and Neil Crabtree there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.